Within 2025, we are seeing a new trend start to emerge, which would be the idea of fan fiction works being traditionally published. Upon first hearing this, I had a knee-jerk reaction of confusion, as it's very well understood that fan fiction is never meant to be something that people are profiting from, as the very nature of it is taking somebody else's intellectual property. Thus, I didn't understand, not just from a moral standpoint, but a legal standpoint, how this could transpire at all. So rather than start to form opinions that were rooted in ignorance, I thought it'd be better to inform myself as to what's actually going on. And I figured I'm probably not the only person who's maybe a little bit confused. Maybe you've only heard about these things from a periphery, you could say, and you would like to have a few more details about this. There is an article I read through that I thought really did a fantastic job going through and explaining what the main things are that people are starting to hear about when it comes to this trend, how this is being taken very seriously by publishers, by authors, by members of the fanfiction community or various different fanfiction communities. So I want to read through this article. It does a better job than I ever could because they know so much more than I do about this topic. But before I get into that, I do want to acknowledge something that I think is something that is going to almost cause a reworking of our definition of fanfiction. Fanfiction in and of itself, the idea of traditionally publishing fanfiction, is not what's transpiring. I think that's where my confusion was, because that's how I would hear about it discussed. But fanfiction is, at the end of the day, still remaining fanfiction and separate from the things that you're going to start to see being published. Whenever somebody gains a following online, a readership, they are not profiting off of that story. They might take what they have learned and the skills they have developed by what you could almost say would be an intellectual property that served as a writing prompt for them. It sparked some creativity within them, and a lot of individuals can point to a story that first had that happen to them. Oftentimes when they were children, there was something that just awakened creativity in their mind, and it set them on this path of wanting to take that story but then explore a certain area that wasn't explored within the show or within the movie or within the book or the video game. They wanted to do something with these characters or certain plot lines, and so they went ahead and wrote it, and then they just shared it with people online, and it's maintained that status. That is fan fiction. But I still think that people have this instinct to hear if an author has any of their origins in fan fiction, or if any of their books ever started as an origin within fan fiction, no matter how much reworking it has had, there is this general dismissive nature toward those works. I wanted, I suppose, to, as a means of challenging myself, but maybe also just presenting this idea of reflecting on how that compares and contrasts to any kind of reimagining, any kind of fairy tale retelling. And then also within fantasy circles especially, I think the idea of, quote, paying homage to the greats, I absolutely think that we have a different attitude towards each of those phrases in and of themselves, but especially those seem to fall under the umbrella of acceptable, whereas if an author ever had any kind of, as I said, origin within fan fiction, there is this sort of like, no, that's separate and you aren't creative enough. And this reminds me of, I have heard many authors talk about how they had certain works that inspired them. And there were certain things that they thought, oh, that's really creative, that's really interesting. What would happen though if you tweaked this thing a little bit? And something that comes to mind is the character Hoyd from Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere works. If you're unfamiliar with the Cosmere, the idea is that there are a lot of stories that are their own stories, but they actually exist within the same universe. And a lot of people compare it to the Marvel Cinematic Universe as an example. But there is a character that appears in every single Cosmere work. And even though the stories, for example, Mistborn is separate from Elantris, which is separate from Warbreaker, and even though these stories are separate, you will see this character pop up in all of these stories. And Sanderson has talked about how this idea came to mind as a result of a different work that he'd read from an author that is often brought up within classic fantasy that he read growing up, and he wanted to explore that character because he thought, well, that character would have such an interesting story to tell. But I like the idea that you don't really know their story, you're just kind of seeing snippets of them, and you wonder, as you are seeing these sort of Easter egg appearances, you start to wonder about their story. It creates this intrigue. You also will see so often within classic fantasy, and I'm using classic fantasy here because I primarily talk about fantasy, and because this is where I see the paying homage statement made quite often. A lot of people will look at older works and they will acknowledge that there is absolutely inspiration taken from Tolkien. However, I don't know that we look at that inspiration in the same way that we look at things that are formally considered retellings or reimaginings, but sometimes retellings and reimaginings are actually less like the source material than the stories that are paying homage to something else. And as an example, and I'm not trying to imply that it doesn't stand on its own by any means, but a lot of people will look at something like Wheel of Time, and within the first book, they'll draw a lot of comparisons between it and Lord of the Rings. Sometimes people can bristle at this and they can feel frustrated because they will say, well, no, it does stand on its own, even if there are some nods. Yeah, there's nods. I'll acknowledge there's nods, but it's totally separate. It's its own thing. And I think that statement right there captures what is actually transpiring with a lot of the fan fiction. Just because that might be true doesn't mean that as readers and reviewers, there can't be times where we feel like certain works don't stand on their own enough, or that there are certain works that aren't separate and creative in their own ways, that they're not doing anything really all that different, and thus perhaps the question can then come up of, did this really need to be written, and is it really just benefiting off of a fandom that already exists? This actually did happen with a book that I read a couple years back that is very clearly inspired by Full Metal Alchemist, and it was clear that the author had inspiration based off of the characters Roy and Riza Hawkeye, and that the author was kind of making their own world that was very similar to Full Metal Alchemist. And then they took these characters that were described the same, that dressed the same, that had very similar personalities. Then they made their origin story sort of a mashup of their actual origin from Full Metal Alchemist combined with other characters from that story and their origin. It essentially combined those things, but for me, all of those pieces were too similar, not to mention there was a phrase within this world that is actually a phrase that is directly from Full Metal Alchemist. It was almost word for word exactly the same, and for me, that crossed into territory of this isn't unique enough, unfortunately. I think that the writing is good, and I think that clearly there is a level of work that has been done when it comes to the pacing, the development of the characters, and all these things, but there wasn't enough for me to make this feel like it stood on its own, and thus I think it's completely fair for people to continue to ask that question. I think we need to ask that question for any story, whether it has a reimagining label, a retelling label, a history of existing in some form through fan fiction, a paying homage sort of story. I think no matter what the situation may be, whether it has those labels or doesn't whatsoever, if something feels too similar to something else, I think it's always important to have that conversation and acknowledge it. But I fear a little bit that fan fiction is just going to be kind of like the new way that we toss around book talk, that term. Anytime a book is associated with book talk, unfortunately, there is this air of, I'll go as far as to say snobbery, where it's like, oh, it's a book talk book, and we kind of just don't even consider it, which is ironic because a lot of the things on book talk that are popular are things that used to be popular on BookTube anyway, or popular in other circles, and sometimes even classic works are getting popular through book talk, so they're having sort of their renaissance and they're getting popular again, but it's not like they're even only associated with book talk. But even if book talk brought something to light, doesn't mean that it's something that we should all just immediately discredit, and there's a whole conversation we could have about the very nature of discrediting things that are associated with book talk, and I do have issues in general with discrediting things and having these blanket statements, because you can find great stories whose origins start in so many different places, that are told through different mediums, that come from different countries, from different backgrounds, from different cultures, and yes, in my opinion, through the popularity of different social media apps. But the focus for today is fan fiction, and as I said, there's an article that was written that I thought this really gets into the meat of it and does a great job going further in depth, so we're going to go ahead and read through that article now. Welcome to Strong Feelings, essays by writers we love in which they share their most impassioned opinions on a given subject. In today's Strong Feelings, Abby Montiel, journalist and contributing writer at Them, explores the rise of the fanfic to real fic pipeline. Have you ever wondered why so many of the men on the covers of popular romance novels, like The Love Hypothesis, bear an uncanny resemblance to Adam Driver? You can thank that popularity to Reylo, the ship name for Star Wars characters Kylo Ren and Rey, for that. This phenomenon, powered largely by fan fiction and fan communities, is nothing new. In fact, fans have been exchanging stories for decades. Take the women at 60s Star Trek conventions, for example, or the popularity of sites like Archive of Our Own, AO3, which has over 6 million registered users. What is new is the increasing transparency with which popular fanfiction communities interact with traditional publishing and how fanfics are getting the, quote, real fic treatment. Within this next section, and pretty much throughout the rest of the article, they're going to mention a ship from Harry Potter that for the life of me, I can never say, and every time I look at it, I don't think Draco and Hermione, I just see Dramamine. These days, another popular ship is poised to dominate publishing in 2025. Dramini, the pairing of Harry Potter characters Hermione Granger and Draco Malfoy. The would-be couple are at the center of Senlin Yu's dystopian tale Manacled, which has become one of the most widely publicized fan fictions in recent memory, clocking in at 400,000 words, which is a lot, and 77 chapters. This tome combines elements of Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale into an alternate universe where Lord Voldemort triumphed. Manacled has broken out of its AO3 origins and made waves with readers who had never interacted with fanfiction or even the original Potter series before. On TikTok, the Manacled hashtag has been used over 46,900 times. Yet by the end of the year, the version of Manacled that fans know and love will no longer exist. In April, Senlin Yu announced via a blog post that the fanfiction would be removed from AO3 at the end of 2024. The author will repurpose Manacled into an original novel called Alchemized, which Penguin Random House is set to publish next summer. Even if you've never waded into the fanfiction world, you've almost certainly heard of popular books created through the pull-to-publish method, in which an author repurposes their fanfiction into an original story. Perhaps the most famous recent example is E.L. James' 50 Shades of Grey trilogy, which was once an AU, fanfic shorthand for alternate universe, on fanfiction.net, inspired by Twilight. Likewise, the After series started off as One Direction fanfiction shared on Wattpad. Despite being some of the most popular pull-to-push phenomena of the 2010s, these books, which are often but not always romance or fantasy-centric, were also widely ridiculed and dismissed as soft women's fiction. But in the 2020s, a new wave of books penned by authors with roots in fan fiction are challenging those perceptions. The popularity of fics in nascent communities like Book Talk have pushed discussions of what the boundaries between fan fiction communities and the publishing industry should be. It's hard to argue that sites like fanfic.net, Wattpad, and AO3 haven't significantly streamlined the process of engaging with fan fiction. For millennial and Gen Z writers who grew up with the internet, fan fiction has also provided a tight-knit community in which they can not only express their passions for fandoms, but hone their writing through real-time responses from readers. Plus, it's a hell of a lot more affordable than pursuing an MFA. I am going to pause reading the article for just a moment to comment on that last point about the real-time input they get from readers. So I do have two things about this that concern me a little bit. I never want writers to feel too much like they are indebted to readers. One, because I always want the writer to feel like they can fully see their vision realized in their work, which doesn't mean that they shouldn't be edited or anything like that, but rather that they aren't beholden to the varying tastes of their readers, because there's never going to be any one readership that is all going to feel the same about what should happen. And also, I still more so look to authors to subvert expectations, to surprise us, to do things that we would never expect, because that's why they're the author, that's why they're the creator of the story and not us. I want to see what their vision is. And even if it doesn't work for me, I would rather support an author doing what they want to do rather than basically writing to fulfill what readers' wishes are. And I also am a little bit concerned about the idea that this is just going to be fan service at times. Now, another side of this is, yeah, there are beta readers. There are people who are meant to give you feedback just in general. And I think when you have a large following online that is contributing to the development of your story, there is something a little odd to me about then transforming that work into something that can be traditionally published, because there's a part of me that thinks like, kind of feels like a group project, that one person who did the majority of the work, but Still, it's like one person now gets to have a career, even though how much input perhaps did readers give initially? And I recognize readers gave that input of their own free will. They didn't expect to be compensated. But it does cross into some other lines that I think we'll have to be aware of, because I could see very easily people becoming friends online where one person started. This is a hypothetical, but I could see in the future there being a work where one person started it and then they made friends with one of the readers of said work, and then that reader actually became such a prominent voice within the development of the story that they basically co-authored, except for the original person gets to take all the credit, and then that other individual doesn't get to see any of the financial rewards for all the work that they put in. Just something that could happen, not trying to imply that that is what's happening all the time, but I'm just kind of always looking to what are the pros and cons, and I could see that being a potential con in the future. Anyway, though, continuing on. After spending a year pitching a novel to literary agents, author Gillian Eliza West got an idea for a Harry Potter fic centered on Dramamine. I still saw Dramamine, and decided to share it on AO3. As she told Mixed Feelings, being part of the Potter fan fiction community helped give her the writing inspiration and confidence to self-publish her first novel, a romantasy book called Ruin. Quote, in a fandom that is so saturated where everyone has 500 tabs open in their browser, I had to learn very quickly how to hook people immediately and build out a world in as little time as possible so people stay engaged. The immediate feedback of what was successful or not, especially in terms of character and relationship development, was crucial to me as a writer. Like Star Wars, the Harry Potter series is so culturally ubiquitous that it feels like a given for it to also dominate the fanfic sphere. As such, there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of writers who have centered their fictions around Dramamine. Author Bridget Knightley, who wrote the wildly popular Dramamine fanfiction Draco Malfoy and the Mortifying Ordeal of Being in Love, logged out of the AO3 account associated with the fic after she finished it and was unaware of its success for months. When she logged onto the account months later, she was surprised to find thousands of messages from readers, including some from literary agents and editors at publishing houses. By then, she'd already written the first draft of what would become her upcoming debut novel, The Irresistible Urge to Fall for Your Enemy, which will be published in July 2025. Quote, I really do mean that fanfiction is a playground, because it's about play, improvisation, discovery, and joy, and rectifying dubious world building and indulgence in sins as a little treat. I do also wonder about, I don't love the idea that literary agents are within these areas, because I think this also can potentially perpetuate certain stereotypes that we're not really looking, and this is by no means trying to imply that this author's work isn't good, but I think that there is this fear that with the rise of, and it's already here, but the continuing rise of social media, and the idea that people are getting book deals not because of the quality of their work, but because of the size of their audience, I think that the idea that somebody could have just posted something online and been like, oh, okay, I'm going to log out. They log back in, they see, oh my gosh, this has thousands of responses, and some of them are literary agents. It's like, well, I mean, maybe it was just that good. But I also wonder, because of how this story is presented of like, oh, there was so many people and it took off, that it could have taken off because it was great, and that could be what caught the agent's eye. It could also be that agents saw that it took off, and then that's what caught their eye. I'm always just, I don't know. I think that it's important for anybody with any kind of following who ends up putting works out that they genuinely are trying to make money off of in some fashion. So I guess in this sense, we're talking about self-pub writers. If you're a self-published author and you gain a large following through something, and this isn't necessarily fan fiction, this is just me going on a slight detour, but if you gain a large following, and through that large following, you are able to make a very good career for yourself, and you make a lot of money, and you get a lot of sponsorships, and you make a lot from ads, and you make a lot from some kind of channel membership or Patreon, and then you put a book out for sale that you do not have edited, I take quite an issue with that. If you have the financial means, and part of what is going to ensure that your story is going to sell is this audience that helped you get to that point anyway, to then not put in the work is part of the problem. You are perpetuating the idea of what I was describing, that people are only getting deals because they're popular and not because their work is good. So I by no means am trying to say that this individual in recounting what happened to them is part of the problem, because that's not what I mean at all. But I am kind of noting that there are individuals out there who will get a lot of success through being online in some fashion, and then they will not put in the work that other people are putting in. And this makes me kind of sad, because there are some people that establish themselves as, I am the voice of criticism. I am the voice of being able to recognize what is good and what is not good. Oh, and here's my book. And then they won't put in the same work that they are being critical toward other people of, who are putting in the work. So I just think that, again, this is why I kind of challenged the definitions that we have in our minds of fan fiction versus retellings versus all these other things, and the labels that we put on things and the stereotypes that those bring, because there are certainly people who have done the very thing I've described, who have built a following, not put in the work, but then are critical of people who do put in the work, who are now paying the price for the poor amount of workmanship that the other person has put in, or other groups of people have put in. Continuing on, as Knightley puts it, fic also creates its own distinct, gorgeous feedback loops, from artists creating fan art of a scene from a fan fiction to readers assembling customized physical fan binders, merging written and visual elements. For the Potter fandom in particular, fan fiction has taken on a new significance in the wake of author J.K. Rowling's vocal transphobia, allowing fans to reclaim the series and its characters from their original creator. Knightley described canon, events that officially happen within a fictional universe, as, quote, a springboard for my own creativity, rather than something to adhere to at all costs. Canon is as much fiction as fan fiction is, she said. The Blorbos can do whatever you'd like, face canon and walk backwards into hell. But outside of Manacled's viral success, Senlin Yu's decision to directly rework her fanfiction feels particularly notable because it was influenced by a practice that has become a growing issue in online fandoms: illegal fanfiction sales. Quote, it has grown clear that as a transformative writer, I have limited options in protecting my stories from this kind of exploitation, but I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to just take the story down, in part because I had worried that might only exacerbate the issue, but I didn't know what other options I had. Unless a written work is in the public domain, fanfiction authors couldn't legally sell their stories, even if they wanted to. That hasn't stopped readers from profiting off their works on sites like Etsy and Mercari. Apart from standard merch, you can also find bound copies of popular fictions, which often sell for hundreds of dollars. This so-called fan binding has historically operated under a fandom gift economy structure, where fans create and distribute these physical copies of fan fiction without any formalized expectations that they'll receive something in return. Illegal fanfic sellers, on the other hand, are making a profit off popular writers' work without their consent. In response, a growing number of fanfiction writers impacted by these illegal sales have chosen to remove these works from the internet altogether, including West herself, who pulled her first ever Draymini fanfiction from AO3 in February. Quote, I would really love for there to be more open discourse and understanding that fanfiction and traditional books differ in many ways, the biggest being that one is a gift and one is a commodity exchanged for money, especially with new readers. You would never rate and review a birthday present or demand that your friend give you more of that gift, then sell that gift with a 400% markup just because you could. Fanfiction should be treated the same. I really appreciate this transparency of really recognizing what their intentions were with fan fiction, what a lot of fan fiction authors' intentions are, why they go about it the way they do, and they're just doing it for fun and to have this sense of community with other people, and other individuals are seeing this as a means to make money. In the hyper-consumerist capitalist hellscape that we call 2024, sorry, this is funny. Fandom spaces sometimes feel like the lone corners of the internet that are driven by creativity and common passions with no expectation of profit. Unlike, say, TikTok and YouTube content creators. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. Your favorite fanfic writers aren't being compensated for their work. They're doing it because they love it. Yet, as fan fiction inches closer to the mainstream and gains new generations of readers, traditional fandom etiquette has been forced to contend with monetization. Quote, growth is uncomfortable no matter the space or sphere it's within. I can only hope that as fan fiction becomes more popular, readers within that space will be open to learning the respect that needs to be given to a fandom space. Knightley pointed out that on her social media site of choice, Instagram, she has seen a spurt of fanfic 101 content to help people entering these spaces for the first time. I think that's wonderful so that more people are informed. But what about the publishing of it all? Squaring traditional publishers' overlap with fanfiction can be complicated, to say the least. In a digital age where so many aspiring authors have been involved with fanfiction at some point in their lives, it's nice to see writers being able to speak openly about how their fanfiction backgrounds have influenced their work without fear of stigmatization from publishers. But traditional publishers are for-profit companies, and fanfiction communities are definitionally the opposite. AO3, for example, was founded in response to the creation of a website called FanLib, which was created with the goal of monetizing fanfiction. The question remains, how can publishers appeal to their very online readers' love of fanfiction tropes without inadvertently feeding into the unregulated monetization of fanfiction that's threatening fandom spaces? While the big five publishers, Penguin, Random House, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, Hachette, and Macmillan, aren't particularly open about how they scout fanfiction authors, I would love to know that. Other companies are opting for transparency. 831 Stories, a self-described romance fiction company, has a tab on its website titled Fanfiction, where readers can find commissioned original fanfiction for all of their published books. Co-founder Clara Mazur told Mixed Feelings that the idea came from speaking to romance readers at a book swap event, many of whom told her that Potter and Twilight fanfiction had introduced them to that genre. Mazur and her business partner Eliza Cerullo gave writers free rein to write whatever fanfiction they'd like about an upcoming release. For example, one fic serves as a prequel to the company's debut novel, The Celebrity Normal Person Romance Big Fan, in which protagonist Maya unknowingly meets her boy band crush Charlie at a Halloween party years before the book takes place. Although these are paid writing gigs, 831 Stories' staff doesn't interfere with the actual works. We don't edit it. We publish what they send us back, which we think is more consistent with what we understand the spirit of fanfiction to be. We think of our books as the beginning of these big universes that we hope to build, and so commissioning fanfiction feels like a way of getting the engine started. We're almost at the end of the article, but I just want to say, this part confuses me a little bit, so I might have to look into this a little bit more because it's only briefly touched on. But if I'm understanding correctly, the idea is that they allow people to commission fanfiction to be written, which still just feels like, I don't know, this part feels a little odd to me because it feels like a preemptive way to make money instead of making money after you make money before. And I understand that fanfiction authors are putting in work to write this, and if somebody is specifically like, hey, can you write this for me? I'll pay you for the writing portion. It's like, I don't know, that feels a little strange. But there are also things in place that exist that are not that different from this. So I'm thinking of, there are at times works that exist, like there are worlds that exist within fantasy and science fiction. And the Forgotten Realms, for example, you'll have writers who are now writing into this world. And that kind of feels like maybe what's going on here, or for example, within a lot of course, superhero comics, you will see the same characters used. And so long as there's already permission, then it makes sense that they're being paid for the writing that they're doing, the work that they're doing, because writing is, of course, work. I think that is the idea, because I don't think they're taking some pre-existing work that they have no connection with. It sounds like they have their own in-house works, and it's a known thing that if you have your story within their company, that there might be individuals who are going to then make a prequel for that, or who might make some kind of spin-off or something like that, and it's an understood thing that might occur. As I said, like something within those really far-reaching fantasy worlds or comic book stories. I think that's what they're stating there, but as I said, that's one that I'd have to look into a little bit more. For now, this more well-publicized era of fanfic and publishing overlap is still very much a work in progress. I think that's a good summary. One good rule of thumb, when in doubt, leave it to the experts, which I'm not, which I'm okay admitting. As I said before, I will have that article linked in the description bar in case you'd like to reference back to it, or maybe see if there's anything else that individual has written, because I really liked how they went about structuring and delivering the information within that article. I thought it was informative, and it was very much just kind of, this is the information that we have, this is the community thus far, and this is sort of the directions that it's currently going in. But as they summarize at the end, still a work in progress. We have yet to see where these things are going to go. That's kind of where I'm at currently as well. I think I try really hard to not allow my preconceived notions of fan fiction and the idea of somebody profiting off of fan fiction. I'm trying to recognize that it's not that simple. It's much more nuanced than that. And as I said at the beginning, still recognize that as a reviewer, if ever I see something, whether it is considered fan fiction or not, if the similarities are too strong for me, then that is going to influence my thoughts and opinions about that work. There's a lot to discuss with this topic, and I'm sure a lot of people have their own opinions, so of course feel free to share those in the comments down below. If you yourself are somebody especially who is familiar with fan fiction, you're a part of the community, and maybe you're even a writer for it, if there are aspects of this conversation that have not yet been brought up, feel free to educate everybody in the comments down below, because I think there are a lot of us who are kind of coming to this without really having a whole lot of knowledge or experience, and this is all new terrain. And if you feel like sharing, I think that would definitely be wonderful and welcome. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later.